Have you ever had the feeling that you're being watched, and that maybe the person watching you might want to have you as their plaything? Here are 3 stories from Reddit of people almost abducted. Enjoy. Number 1. So, I've been reading all of these stories for a while, and I finally decided to share my experience. I'm 24 and this happened when I was around 5. I used to visit my Aunt Carol up in New York for 1 to 2 weeks every summer for about 6 years. My family's from North Carolina, but my aunt had moved to New York for her husband's job a few years prior to me coming to visit. Anyways, I loved going to her house. She lived in the country and had a beautiful house with a lot of land and a big creek behind it. My cousins who visited would all go swimming and search for fossils down in the creek. My aunt also loved yard sales. We would go every Saturday and Sunday morning to bargain hunt. My aunt and uncle had a lot of money, but they were very cheap. They never went to big name grocery stores or bought anything new. Maybe that's why they had so much money. One week I went to visit them and my cousin Erica was there as well. Erica was a few years older than me, making her about 10 or 11 at the time. It was a Saturday morning and Erica, my aunt, and I had just finished running around looking at yard sales. We decided to stop at a dollar store on the way home so my aunt could grab a couple of things for dinner. I didn't want to go in because I was exhausted from being up so early. She allowed Erica and I to wait in the car while she ran in really quick. It was hot, so she left the windows down. I was pretty tired and began to fall asleep. That's when a big old-looking pickup pulled up beside the car. I heard a dog barking and immediately sat up. In the back of the pickup were 2 huge German shepherds going nuts. I'm talking growling and barking, but they were in their kennel. German shepherds have always been my favorite breed of dog ever since I was little. In fact, I currently have 3 now. I was fascinated and started crawling over my cousin to get a closer look. I was talking to myself loudly about how beautiful these dogs were. As I'm talking, this older looking man with a long black ponytail and jeans gets out of the truck. He sees me smiling and asks if I would like to pet them. Even though the dogs were going nuts in their kennel, I said yes. My cousin's telling me no and telling the man that we have to wait for our aunt to come back. He looks around and tells my cousin that it'll only take a second. I unlocked the car, jumped out, and ran to the other side to see these dogs. My cousin wastes no time locking the car back up and calling for me to come back. I ignored her and started trying to climb in the back of the truck. The man picked me up and held me, while the dogs continued to bark and growl. I was smart enough to not pet them, but I did admire them. The man started asking me questions like, where was I from? What was I doing that day? He then told me how pretty I was and how much he liked my accent. I had a strong southern accent when I was little. I vaguely remembered him looking around a lot, but being so young, I didn't think it was weird. He then asked if I wanted to see pictures of the puppies his dogs just had. Of course I wanted to see the puppies. I could barely contain how excited I was. He carried me around to the passenger side of the truck. Right as he was about to open the door, I heard a woman scream my name. I looked around and saw my aunt running out of the store. She had dropped her bags and was sprinting towards me and the man. He immediately put me down, went to the driver's side of the truck, got in, and drove off. I started crying because I was so confused on what was going on. My aunt caught up to me and grabbed my arm. I'd never seen anyone so mad and scared at the same time. She was crying and yelling, asking my cousin why she let me get out of the car. I told my aunt it wasn't her fault, I just wanted to see the dogs. After my aunt calmed down, we drove home and she called my mother to let her know what happened. I'm not sure what they said to each other, but I was still allowed to go visit every summer. I was never allowed to be by myself again. Now, I know that the man could have been a good guy that had no ill intentions, but I also know he sped off without saying a word when my aunt came running out of the store. So either way, strange New York man at the dollar store. Let's never meet again. Number 2. This happened to me when I was 16 and in high school. I lived in a small desert town in California. There wasn't much to do if you were under the age of 21, so any teenagers that lived there were kind of ignored. I hung out with an interesting group of girls who weren't into drinking or recreational drug use, which was a pretty rare thing where I was from. We were the honor roll kids, but that didn't mean that we didn't get into our fair share of trouble from time to time. We enjoyed urban exploring and breaking into abandoned buildings. There were a lot of abandoned country clubs and outlet malls in the area. Sometimes the places we went to weren't abandoned though, just closed or having construction done. Those places were sometimes harder to get into, but were closer to populated areas and were generally safer. There were a couple of times we could have gotten into some serious trouble, but we were at that age where you felt invincible, like nothing could possibly happen to you. One night, my friends and I had nothing to do. We decided to pool our money together, buy snacks, and hang out at the playground of the closed preschool. The preschool was out of the way, next to an empty sandlot that stretched out into the desert. It only connected to this one road, which people rarely used because it led out of town. We thought it was a great place for the four of us to sit and talk and enjoy our snacks without being bothered. The playground attached to the preschool was small, intended for toddlers. It was surrounded by a short brick wall around the front, with much taller walls along the sides, the back being the tallest. It must have been over 9 feet tall, with an overhanging street lamp next to it. All we had to do was hop over the 4-foot wall in the front to get in. We had to be cautious that night because for some reason, there were cars driving up and down the road, which I previously mentioned, people rarely used. Patiently, we waited for a car to go by, crouched against the wall. Then once the headlights no longer had the preschool in view, we hopped over. I began throwing the snacks over, but when I threw a jug of Arizona iced tea, my friends failed to catch it and the lid popped off from impact. A geyser of tea flew up into the air and we all laughed. I waited for another car to pass before jumping over so I wouldn't be seen. It was a red pickup truck and I didn't think too much of it and hopped over after it passed. The way the street lamp hung over the playground, its light didn't actually illuminate the playground but lit the roundabout driveway in front of it, leaving us in shadow. It was perfect because no one would see us, even if they looked into the playground. We quickly found a bench to sit on and started eating our junk food. We were joking and talking quietly, trying to keep our laughing from being too loud. We were there for maybe 30 minutes when we noticed that a car pulled into the roundabout driveway. We went silent and ducked as the headlights turned our way. The car drove back onto the road and out of sight. We assumed that the person probably wanted to turn around without driving all the way to the stoplight, and left it at that. After another 5 minutes, it happened again. A red pickup drove into the driveway. We assumed it would be there for the same reason, that they just wanted to turn around. But they didn't. The truck stopped. It idled for a good while, maybe 2 to 3 minutes. We got nervous. What would someone, besides teens playing around, be doing at a preschool in the middle of the night? Finally, the person got out of the pickup, leaving it running. He walked straight up to the 4-foot wall and stared into what could have only been, from his perspective, darkness. Above us, there was an overhang to provide shade during the day for the bench we sat at, giving us an even greater cover of darkness. The strange thing was, the way the light cast down, we couldn't see his face. I could make out that he was an older white male with a shaved head and probably in his late 30s. He was wearing a button-down shirt and slacks, but I couldn't see his face. The man continued to stand there, seeming to stare at us. He said nothing, which freaked us out the most. If he was there to tell us to leave, why didn't he say anything? And if he couldn't see us, why didn't he leave? I could still hear the pickup idling in the distance. I wanted to escape, but he was standing smack dab in the middle of the smaller wall. What if he grabbed one of us? One of my friends touched my arm to get my attention, and without any words, motioned to where the 4-foot wall connected to one of the side walls on the left. On the other side of that wall was an empty lot that led into the desert. That wall had to be around 7 or 8 feet, but if you stopped where the shorter wall connected to it, you could get leverage and jump over. I was scared. I was not fast or athletic at all. What if I fell or couldn't pull myself over the wall? I didn't want to keep sitting there with this strange man possibly staring at me anymore. The same friend that had just gotten my attention got us all to look at her, and she held up her fingers to count down. When she got to 1, I bolted, leaping on top of the shorter wall and vaulting myself over the tall sidewall without worrying where I landed. I somehow ended up landing in a roll instead of on my feet. I sprung up and started running towards the nearest light source, a Ralph's grocery store. I didn't stop until I was in front of the store. I looked around and realized that my friends were here with me. All 4 of us had made it out. We were in front of Ralph's, hiding behind some parked cars, catching our breath, some of us letting out nervous laughter. I then noticed the red pickup truck pulling into the parking lot. The windows must have been tinted because I was unable to see the person that had been watching us. We couldn't get inside the store because it was closed. The truck didn't stop, but instead circled the parking lot several times. Each time it passed us, I felt like he was going to jump out and snatch one of us. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he gave up and drove away. We took to running right away to the nearest friend's house since we all lived so close to each other. Once we reached our destination, we all collapsed on the lawn. We talked about how freaky the whole experience was, but after an hour, our minds and conversation went elsewhere. I can't help but wonder, what was that man doing there in the middle of the night? And what were his intentions? So, ambiguous man in the red pickup truck, let's not ever meet again. Number 3. Hello. I've been reading a lot of stories from here, and I feel that I should share my very own experience with you all, as it was something that changed me and made me into who I am today. Today I'm a 20-year-old Brazilian guy, but this story takes place years ago when I was 12. It all started out as a normal school day. Boring subjects, annoying people, you know, the usual. I come from a good family that's in a good financial situation, so at the time, I had a Motorola V3 cell phone, which was top tier back then and also uncommon for kids to have. Every day after school, I waited for my father to pick me up. It always took a little while for him to get here. At that time, he drove a silver Mariva. It was also the same car he used to drive me to school with. That being said, one day I was waiting out front for my dad to pick me up. I was playing the new Super Mario Bros. On my DS, which I kept in my backpack. That's when my cell phone rang and I heard the voice of a somewhat cheery man saying,
"Hey Pete, it's your Uncle Paul. I'm here to pick you up for your dad. Come outside."
I simply answered with, "Okay," and left through the gate. The thing was, it was still early. Way earlier than the normal time my dad usually picks me up. When I thought about that, I went back inside and waited for another call. And it came fast.
"Where are you?"
"I don't see you." He let out a sigh and started giving me a description.
"I'm in the same blue Corolla that you were dropped off in the morning in. Come on!"
He said impatiently and hung up. My 12-year-old brain processed what was happening and connected the dots. The thing was, I had no uncles with a name that started with P. In fact, theirs all started with AS. Also, it couldn't be my mom's brother because he's been dead for a long time now. And the last thing was, no one called me Pete, but my family. Those being my brothers, my sister, and my parents. I started to get nervous and talk to my friends about it. Their advice was, "Yeah, tell him to go fuck himself." I'm not the type that likes to cuss, so I headed to the principal's office for help. On my way there, the man calls again, and I pick up. This time, he was angry.
"Why the fuck are you taking so long, you son of a bitch? I'm in the blue Corolla. Are you brain dead? Hurry up, come on out with that stupid video game of yours."
Then he hung up. Instantly, I froze. Thoughts rushed through my head such as, are they trying to kidnap me? Is this real? Now I started running to the principal's office. I was getting nervous, so I called my dad. "Dad, did you by chance send someone named Paul here to pick me up?"
"No. Whoever's calling you, don't go outside. I'll be right there. Don't go outside."
I went inside the office and burst into tears, asking for someone to get the man that was probably out there waiting for me in a blue Corolla. I gave the teacher and the principal the number he was calling me from. They called, but to no avail. They decided to go outside and check out the blue Corolla for themselves. I stayed in the office and got another call. I picked it up with shaking hands, even though I knew he couldn't harm me.
What's taking so long, you little shit?
Fear consumed me, and I began choking up.
Listen! I know you're no uncle of mine. You have no idea which car I came to school in, and you're trying to kidnap me for whatever reason. I'm not going outside!
Again,
What?
you're not coming out. Again, you've been out. You just know better.
I held my phone in my hands and stared at nothingness for a while, until the teacher and the principal came back, saying that there was no such thing as a blue Corolla outside. Shortly after, my dad arrived and I was escorted to his car by guards. I sat there and did nothing as my dad talked on the phone trying to track the number that had been calling me, and to find someone by the name of Paul. I took the rest of the week off. I began having nightmares about being outside the school and then being grabbed. I went back to school the following week and instantly joined the Kendo Club in order to know something about self-defense, especially if I got the chance to be armed with something. Years later, my mom and dad divorced. I saw that coming though. During the whole blue Corolla incident, I was living with my older brothers because they didn't want me to be involved in our parents fighting. However, once I came back home with my mom, I found out they divorced because my father had around 5 lovers in 5 different places. One had even called my mom saying, "You won. I have tried everything to keep him for me, but you won." Or at least that's what my mother says happened. I wonder, could all this kidnap story be part of a scheme from one of these lovers to steal my dad from us? If it was, then that just makes me uncomfortable to know that a human being is capable of kidnapping and probably killing a kid for whatever the reason. The good thing is that today I'm 20, a teacher, and regional champion of Kendo, and I have never heard of Paul again. I still wonder what would have happened to me if I didn't go back inside, but instead kept looking for him. So, Uncle Paul, let's not meet. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed. Until next time.